Stars are right, and that means it's time for another episode of The Whisper in Darkness. I'm your host, the Man from Lang. Thank you very much for joining me today. On this episode, I am reviewing the Survivor and Neutral cards in 1,000 Shapes of Horror, the second Mythos pack in the Dream Eater cycle. There are spoilers throughout if you care about that sort of thing. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Before we get started, I'd like to thank the patrons of this channel for their tremendous support and Cole Monroe Chitty for his rendition of A Man from Lang. The Arkham Horror LCG community is amazing, and these people have gone above and beyond to bring you content like these reviews, as well as my playthroughs. If you would like to become a patron to support the channel's goals and see your name in lights, follow the link down below, sign up for a tier of your choice, and claim your rewards. That would be awesome. Without further ado, let's get started. The first Survivor card in the pack is Scrounge for Supplies. It's a free event that has no skill icons and the Fortune trait. It has the following game text: choose a level 0 card in your discard pile, add the chosen card to your hand. Survivors have been the masters of turning their trash into treasure since the core set. Scavenging lets an investigator return an item card in their discard pile if they succeed by 2 or more during an investigate skill test, while Wendy's Amulet lets everyone's favorite orphan recur events. Resourceful, a Survivor skill from the Path to Carcosa lets investigators return a Survivor card to their hand if a skill test is successful. A Chance Encounter 0 and 2 let them return an ally to play from the discard pile, while True Survivor lets them return 3 skill cards with the innate trait to their hand. William York's special ability and Elder Sign ability let him play an asset from the discard pile or return a card from his discard pile to his hand, respectively. Finally, there's Silas Marsh, whose Elder Sign ability lets him return a skill card to his hand from his discard pile. Scrounge for Supplies is like William York's Elder Sign ability, albeit limited to level 0 cards. Still, that is a very powerful effect, since it's the far easiest way to return any non-survivor card to your hand from the discard pile. Compare it with the other options available, and you'll see that Scrounge for Supplies is an exceptional deal. Let's take Scavenging for example. It requires an action to play, and you've got to take an investigate action to trigger it. It lets you grab an item from any class, but you've got to succeed by 2 or more on a skill test to do it. Scrounge for Supplies eliminates the test requirement and lets you grab any card you want. Divermus Mysterious, an asset from Union and Disillusion, lets you play a spell or insight event from your discard pile in exchange for a doom. However, Divermus Mysterious is a level 2 card that requires an action to play and an action to trigger. It's limited to spell or insight events, which are then removed from the game. Scrounge for Supplies is a level 0 card that doesn't cost you any experience. It costs you only 1 action to swap it for any level 0 card you want in the discard pile. The Council's Coffers, a neutral asset For the Greater Good, lets you play a card from your discard pile for free. However, the Council's Coffers is a level 2 card. It requires an action to play and a ridiculous number of actions to open all of the locks before you can trigger it. Did I mention that Scrounge for Supplies takes only 1 action and you get whichever level 0 card you want immediately? Finally, there is the very roundabout option that is Quantum Flux, a mystic event from A Phantom of Truth. Quantum Flux doesn't return a card from your discard pile to your hand. It simply shuffles your discard pile back into your deck so you have a chance of drawing the card you want. Obviously, Scrounge for Supplies is a much easier solution to the problem. As you can see, returning a non-survivor card from your discard pile to your hand hasn't been the easiest thing to do. The action required to play Scrounge for Supplies is trivial in comparison to the requirements of the other cards that are currently available. So which card do you return to your hand with Scrounge for Supplies? Well, that's up to you and what your deck is trying to achieve. Survivors already have access to a bunch of cards that help them dig through their discard pile. Scrounge for Supplies is another tool they can use to fetch the cards Resourceful can't touch. If you're playing one of the Dunwich Legacy Investigators, Scrounge for Supplies could be one of the best level 0 cards in that investigator's respective class. If you're playing Agnes Baker, Marie Lambeau, or Patrice Hathaway, Scrounge for Supplies could fetch you Deny Existence, Shriveling, or Ward of Protection. If you're playing Finn Edwards, Preston Fairmont, Tony Morgan, or Wendy Adams, Scrounge for Supplies may become a Double or Nothing, Intel Report, or Quick Thinking. If you're playing Tommy Muldoon or William York, Scrounge for Supplies could be any number of weapons, another Dynamite Blast, or a Vicious Blow. If you're playing Mandy Thompson or Minte Fan, you can exchange Scrounge for Supplies for a Deduction, a Laboratory Assistant, or a Working a Hunch. And if you're playing Lola Hayes, well, she's got good options in all the classes, depending on her build. Scrounge for Supplies is a powerful card. It's certainly the easiest option to return the best level 0 non-survivor card in your discard pile at the time to your hand. As a level 0 survivor card, it's certainly available to a lot of different investigators. Sure, it costs you an action and a card, but what you get in return is only limited by the cards in your discard pile. The second survivor card in the pack is Brute Force. It's a skill that costs 1 experience point. It has a combat skill icon and the innate and developed traits. You may commit only 1 copy of Brute Force to a skill test. While Brute Force is committed during a basic fight action, it gains 2 combat skill icons and the text, "If this test is successful by 2 or more, this attack deals +2 damage." Brute Force is the first in a trio of survivor skills in the Dream Eater cycle that rewards investigators for taking basic fight, investigate, or evade actions. What's a basic fight action? Well, it's the basic action described in the Learn to Play guide when an investigator uses the fight action to attack one enemy that is at his or her location. That investigator makes a combat skill test against the enemy's fight value. If the combat skill test is successful, the attack succeeds and the investigator deals 1 damage to the attacked enemy. Fight actions or on weapons spells or other special attacks do not count as basic fight actions, so you can't use Brute Force in combination with, say, Duke or a Fire Axe. Basic fight actions are less appealing to investigators than fight actions on weapons, spells, and other special attacks because the investigators are limited to their base combat skill value, plus any passive bonuses and they deal only 1 damage. It's simply a lot less efficient to take down a 4 health enemy with a basic fight action when you could use a Fire Axe and finish the job in a couple of swings. Brute Force attempts to remedy this problem in 2 ways. First, you commit it to a basic fight action. Brute Force gains 2 combat skill icons for a total of 3. Combat-oriented investigators such as Tommy Muldoon, Tony Morgan, Silas Marsh, and William York are rocking combat skill values of 7 or 8 if they commit Brute Force to a skill test, which is fantastic against enemies with fight values of 3 or 4. Second, if you commit Brute Force to a basic fight action and succeed by 2 or more, you deal 2 additional damage for a total of 3. This ability is a little trickier to judge. If I'm playing on easy or standard difficulty, I usually want to be 2 up before I pull from the Chaos bag because most of the tokens in the bag have values ranging from +1 to -2. If I want to succeed by 2 with any sort of consistency, then I want my modified skill value to be at least 3 or 4 higher than the difficulty of the skill test before I pull from the Chaos bag. If you're playing Tommy Muldoon, Tony Morgan, Silas Marsh, or William York, and you're 4 up before the pull against enemies with fight values of 2 or 3, odds are you're going to deal that 3 damage. It's not guaranteed, of course. This is the Chaos bag that we're talking about after all, but most of the time that enemy is going to take 3 damage. If you're battling an enemy with a fight value of 4+, the odds of dealing 3 damage with Brute Force alone take a significant hit. You'll need to commit at least 1 additional skill icon to the test or rely on passive combat skill bonuses from cards such as Beat Cop or Jessica Hyde to put you over the top. Tony Morgan has a leg up here because he has a combat skill value of 8 if he commits Brute Force to a basic fight action, so the odds of landing 3 damage against an enemy with a fight value of 4 is quite good. There are quite a few investigators who may purchase Brute Force, but this card is really intended for investigators with above average combat skill values, especially if you want that extra damage. Tommy Muldoon, Tony Morgan, Silas Marsh, and William York will have a lot more success leveraging this card for the bonus damage than, say, Ashcan Pete. Rita Young may also want to consider Brute Force, although she's right on the bubble. Rita's base combat skill value of 3 is okay, but it's going to be more challenging for her to land that bonus damage consistently without passive bonuses or committing additional skill icons to the skill test. It's also worth mentioning that Brute Force has the innate trait, so you can return it to your hand with True Survivor, the level 3 survivor event from Black Star's Rise. I quite like Brute Force. It's not the type of card that I would typically purchase for a combat-oriented deck, since bigger and better weapons usually take priority due to the disparity between the effectiveness of basic fight actions and fight actions on weapons, spells, or other special attacks. Brute Force doesn't necessarily eliminate that gap, since it's a one-shot skill that will get played only once or twice a game, barring any recursion tricks. However, Brute Force does give combat-oriented investigators the option to take a basic fight action and dish out some additional damage without feeling as though their efficiency is taking a hit. If an investigator doesn't need to take a basic fight action because they've got better options, they can still commit Brute Force to the subsequent skill test for a combat skill icon. Just keep in mind that Brute Force is the type of card that you need to keep an eye on the odds of pulling certain tokens if you want to maximize the potential of that meaty damage bonus. There is only one neutral card in the pack, and it is Versatile. It's a permanent neutral asset that costs 2 experience points. It has the talent trait and the game text. You get +5 deck size. Your investigator's deck building options gains 1 other level 0 card from any class: Guardian, Seeker, Rogue, Mystic, or Survivor. The final card spoiled in the preview of 1,000 Shapes of Horror, Versatile has generated a lot of debate in the Arkham Horror LCG community. Players have coalesced around 2 perspectives. On the one hand, there are players who argue this card opens Pandora's box, since an investigator can add 1 copy of any level 0 card to their deck, 2 if they double up on Versatile, which I think is what a lot of players would do if they go this route. It's worth noting that when you purchase Versatile, you get to add 5 cards to your deck for free. You don't have to pay any additional experience for them. Versatile creates limitless possibilities, which is great if you enjoy deck building decks. However, it also raises the possibility that some of those decks may discover broken combinations, which I think is bad for the game in the long run. On the other hand, you've got players who argue Versatile is a trap that offers players very little in exchange for making their deck less predictable and more inconsistent. While I can certainly appreciate the limitless potential of Versatile, I tend to agree with this perspective. Since the dawn of collectible card games way back in the 1990s, there has been an unwritten rule when it comes to building quote-unquote competitive decks. They should contain as few cards as legally possible. In the case of a game such as Magic the Gathering, that means 40 or 60 cards in limited and constructed formats respectively. While there's nothing stopping Magic players from playing more cards than the minimum required, doing so is frowned upon. The reason players stick to these limits is simple. If you want to win, you need to maximize the chances of drawing the cards that are key to your strategy. Decks that do this will be more predictable and perform more consistently than those that don't. The Arkham Horror LCG has different deck building restrictions than Magic, but I think you can make the same argument for your Investigator deck. If you want to quote-unquote win at the Arkham Horror LCG, you should play as few cards as legally possible to maximize the predictability of your draws and improve the overall consistency of the deck's performance. If you want your deck to investigate, fight, or evade consistently, then you need to maximize the odds of drawing cards that help you achieve those objectives. If you're not drawing those cards, you're probably in trouble. Versatile lets you quote-unquote break the Arkham Horror LCG's deck building restrictions by adding 5 cards to your deck, including 1 level 0 card from any class. Is adding 1 card from any class worth the loss of predictability and consistency? I don't think that it is for most investigators, because the odds of drawing that card consistently will be quite low. Meanwhile, you've added 5 cards to your deck that will reduce the chances of drawing the cards you do need. If you purchase 2 copies of Versatile, your deck size jumps by 10 cards. Adding 10 cards does reduce the chance of drawing your weaknesses, which is okay, but it also lowers the odds of drawing the cards that you really need to win the game. Personally, I don't think it's going to be worth the trade-off unless you've got a way to mitigate the consistency issues. Doc Leo sums up the potential problems with Versatile nicely in his write-up for his Versatile Diana Stanley build over on ArkhamDB. Doc Leo includes 2 copies of Scrounge for supplies in the deck to replay cancel cards that he discards from beneath Diana with her signature asset, Twilight Blade. However, he acknowledges that 2 copies of Versatile are tricky to balance, since adding 10 cards to the deck makes it more difficult to draw his cancels and the Twilight Blade consistently, both of which are critical to Diana's draw and resource engines. Doc Leo tries to mitigate Versatile's drawback by adding Tetsuo Mori, a Guardian ally from this pack who can search for items, including the Twilight Blade, and Scroll of Prophecies, a mystic asset from the Search for Kadath that lets him draw additional cards. Doc Leo rounds out the deck by adding a bunch of additional cards that have cancel in their game text, so Diana has plenty of cancels to work with. Now, judging by Doc Leo's write-up, it sounds as though the deck is fun and effective. Would it be as fun and effective if Doc Leo hadn't taken the steps to mitigate Versatile's drawbacks? Probably not. I can think of a few investigators who might benefit from Versatile. First up, a Guardian who has purchased Stick to the Plan from Black Star's Rise. Stick to the Plan lets you search your deck for up to 3 different events with the Tactic or Supplies trait and attach them to it before you draw your opening hand. Now, you're still reducing the chance of drawing the cards you need, but attaching that level 0 card to Stick to the Plan eliminates any issues associated with drawing it consistently. Seekers in general, and Mandy Thompson in particular, are another group of investigators who might find something to like in Versatile. Seekers have access to plenty of card draw and tutors, which they can use to find the tools they need despite their larger deck size. Mandy's response and Elder Sign ability go one better, making those search tools even more efficient in her hands than a typical Seeker. Now, I'm not entirely sure which card Mandy would add to her deck, since her deck building restrictions enabled her to increase her deck size to include cards from the Rogue, Mystic, and Survivor classes. That's pretty much all the cards except for Guardian, so I'm not sure why she would increase her deck size by 5 to add 1 card from those classes when she can increase her deck size by 10 and include more. Versatile might also be an option for investigators like Harvey Walters, who can only include Seeker cards in their decks. If you want to get a non-Seeker card in a Harvey Walters deck, your only option is going to be Versatile. The same with all the other investigators in the Investigator Starter Deck product that's coming out later this year. Patrice Hathaway is another investigator who might benefit from Versatile. Patrice draws a new hand of 5 cards every turn, so she's likely to deck herself pretty quickly, regardless of whether her deck size is 42 or 47. Patrice is an off-class mystic, so she may be interested in supplementing her deck with a powerful Seeker or a Rogue card. Versatile gives you the option to break the rules. Whether you take the bait depends a lot on your deck building philosophy. If you enjoy bending the rules and you can find a way to mitigate Versatile's drawbacks, Versatile does open up a lot of possibilities. If, on the other hand, you value predictability and consistency above all else, then Versatile is probably not the card for you. That's going to do it for my review of the Survivor and Neutral cards in 1,000 Shapes of Horror. There's a lot to like in this pack if you play Survivor or off-class Survivors. Scrounge for Supplies is one of the easiest ways to retrieve a level 0 card from the discard pile, especially if you don't have access to any of the other Survivor recursion tools. Brute Force gives combat-oriented investigators the option to take a basic fight action or 2 and still deal decent damage. As for Versatile, it gives players a way to break the rules of deck building. It creates limitless possibilities. However, adding 5 to 10 additional cards to your deck can be a significant drawback, especially if you value consistency. If you plan to experiment with Versatile, mitigating that drawback should be a priority, and that will often mean adding draw to your deck. And there are some classes that don't have access to a lot of card draw, namely Guardians and up until recently Mystics. Rogues can also struggle in the draw department, so adding 10 cards in that in a rogue deck may be more trouble than it's worth. All in all, I quite like 1,000 Shapes of Horror. There are only a couple of cards, namely Let God Sort Them Out and Healing Words, that I am not a big fan of. Otherwise, there is a lot of good stuff in this pack, especially for investigators, for the investigators that came out in the Dream Eaters cycle. And I'm looking forward to seeing what Dark Side of the Moon has to offer. That's going to do it for this review. If you enjoy what you hear, remember to like, comment, and subscribe. If you need to contact me, I can be reached at manfromleng@gmail.com. I'm also on Twitter at manfromleng. Until the stars are right, keep your shotgun close and your elder sign closer. Take care out there, and happy investigating.